It's more technology than ever in education today. Online degree programs, algorithms that grade essays, apps that measure how much of your homework you actually do. What could possibly go wrong? High tech promises better teaching and better learning, but what happens when it delivers changes for the worse? Joining us to discuss from San Francisco, we have Allison Johnston, CEO of Insta.edu. From Seattle, Washington, Devin Coldwee, a writer and photographer who contributes to TechCrunch. Joanne Manister, faculty lecturer and online course developer at the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign. And from Philadelphia, Marcus Wright, a master's education candidate at the University of Pennsylvania. And also from Philadelphia, Dr. Paul Zak, professor of neuroscience and economics at the University of Pennsylvania. So hello, everybody. Welcome.
Hi.
Hello.
Hey.
How's it going?
It's great.
Just
so we
a correction.
Oh, yes.
I'm in Southern California. I'm at Claremont Graduate University, although my PhD is from Penn, like Marcus, who's going to graduate school there. So I'm at Claremont. Thank you.
Thank you for the correction, our mistake there. So we have a lot of ground to cover today, and it really runs the gamut. But I guess that we can just start breaking these things down one by one. And so, recently we've seen a lot of pieces in the news that are highlighting new varieties that are out there when it comes to technology and education. One of those being CourseSmart. This is a Silicon Valley startup that actually allows teachers to track their students' progress with digital textbooks, so they can tell how many pages you opened in a book, how much time you actually spent on those pages. And, some have actually called this, including people commenting on it in the New York Times piece, Orwellian. Devin, I'm going to let you start off here. I mean, do you think that this is something that's a great development, or is there something a little creepy about it, when teachers get to know just how much time you spent on every page and how many pages you actually opened?
Well, I think it's a little bit of both. Obviously, there is the kind of creepy Orwellian piece, because obviously, what if you are waiting until the last minute because you're more productive that way? Or what if you read with a friend and it doesn't show on, their device that you read it and stuff? There's lots of ways for it to fail. But also there's a lot of helpful stuff for the teachers. I mean, if everybody was on this system, teachers could really see, they could see which students are actually reading, which ones are reading at the last minute, which ones are struggling with, chapter 4 or whatever. It's useful, but I think that we're not quite, I don't think we've figured out all the use cases yet.
Dr. Zak, what would you say?
So I think, the world is going to algorithms. And, we build algorithms on very high frequency neurologic data, and we use that to help people understand particular narrative structures and stories. And we can actually predict with very high accuracy, just from having you, getting 2 minutes of you watching a story or reading a story, on whether you will actually change your behaviors or attitudes after seeing that story. So, I agree with Devin that the ability to misuse this is there. Having said that, why not have a great tool that can give even the individual student feedback? Hey, you're not really focusing on this. This is not going so well. And the instructor can follow up and say, hey, this is, you don't seem to be learning this in the best possible way. Let's spend some time chatting online in person and try to figure out, how you might get the most out of this material.
But then, go ahead.
I was just going to ask, so these things are just they can just sort of see at the time you're lingering on a page. It can't really tell if you're actually reading it, right? So it's not tracking your eye movement. It can't tell if you're really focused. I mean, so, we could just click on a page and leave it there and, go back to watching whatever we're watching on our computer and then click to the next page. I mean, so I don't know. It gives some information, but I don't know if it gives a full amount. So maybe Dr. Zak could, elucidate more. Is the technology going to move where we can actually, visualize, if someone really is engaged? It'd be creepy with a little camera or something, but, does it have to come to that to make sure our students are doing the work?
So that's a very good point, though, right? Because, I think that people always figure out how to game the system, and so I'm sure that students will be able to figure that out. And so on one hand, is that making students lazier? Is it also making teachers lazier? Because then they just monitor and say, well, these guys, I can tell that they, spent this amount of time on their certain pages for the day. I'm not really going to follow up with them. And, it does actually put a lot of responsibility on the teacher to then mine through that data and then have to approach their students.
Well, the algorithms are getting better and better. So we actually do experiments. So we use just a camera from a laptop and actually see how people are engaging, where they're looking. You can track movements of the mouse. There's a lot of physiologic data you can get just from a standard camera now, because the algorithms have gotten better and better. So, I mean, one way to protect students and perhaps engage with faculty is to give students an opt-in or opt-out. So you can say, look, we have this tool. It's an algorithm that turns your camera on. And if you want to get feedback while you're studying, then the instructor of this course can actually review that data with you and talk about how you might study better or how you might increase your understanding of the material. And so I think, if you have an opt-out situation where perhaps most students have it, they don't care, and they get some feedback, they get a little report, it would be nice to get that. Wouldn't it be great when you were in college, and most of us are out of college, to have to say, like, you know what, take a coffee break. You don't seem to be paying attention. Come back in 10 minutes. Or, you seem to not have read the top half of this page very well, so you might want to reread that. It'd be a kind of, we call this neural prosthetics. It's like a little adjunct to your brain that helps you do some task better.
But this course smart isn't that far along, if I understand that correctly.
No, I agree.
Okay, all right. I don't know. I'm a little creeped out at the thought of a camera always trained on me, but especially while I'm reading.
I mean, you have new phones and new tablets and stuff have like eye tracking and head tracking software. It's just a question of time. It's a technical problem, not a big. It's just an engineering problem that we'll solve. Right.
Yeah,
you can just sort of safely assume it'll be there sooner or later.
And that of course is one component of this entire conversation too. Is when the technology gets there, will it kind of cross that threshold into something that does ultimately feel like surveillance and monitoring and become very creepy? But it's also just this removal of the human element from education as we know it, and there are other examples too. For example, the algorithm didn't like my essay, right? Or these days we're now seeing software being put out there so that teachers don't have to necessarily grade essays anymore, but there is software that can do it. And so to me, this automatically starts to raise a lot of questions because it just feels like the teachers are naturally going to get lazy. And then if you look at this tweet right here, somebody said, essay grading software, this is Hari Srinivasan, said, the perfect essay algorithm will be beaten, just a matter of time. Again, can you just game the system? Allison, maybe you can chime in here too. I mean, so much of this stuff is moving online. It's moving away from human interaction, peer-to-peer interaction, which is what you focus on. How do we make sure that you do keep that human element in education?
I mean, I think the big thing that you need to think about with all these things with, essay grading, telling what people are reading is what those tools should be doing is taking away the busy work from teachers so that they're not doing the things that machines can do. There's always going to be this aspect of education where you need that, person-to-person interaction, whether it's a conversation in class, whether it's the teacher talking to the student to understand exactly what they're not understanding and re-explaining it in a different way. So if we can correctly, essentially, optimize to free up teachers' time to really be focusing on those core areas where they can add value to students in the best way possible, then the technology really brings us a long way.
But is grading an essay really just busy work? I feel like that's, so if we look at standardized testing in the way that we used to do it, right? So you have the standardized tests that are you just fill in a little bubble, and then you put that in a machine and it's graded. The essay is actually supposed to be the part where you're showing your critical thinking skills, your ability to analyze, to write, to try to tell some kind of a story and create an entire argument.
Yes, I agree with you there. I don't think it should be something where I put in an essay and my teacher never reads anything about it. But if some automated processes can basically help the teacher skip over time spent, checking for correct punctuation, really understand how I'm approaching the essay, how I'm seeing the issues, and let them basically focus on providing feedback there's a lot of value.
Marcus, what do you say? I mean, do you think that this is, when it comes to even trying to motivate students, knowing that there is an algorithm, perhaps a software that you have to, tailor your writing skills to? Do you think that that's going to be a motivating factor? Or, because even with essay grading, it's obviously something that is very subjective based on your professor and what style they might like, what their feelings might be even towards you as a student.
Well, I don't have the answers. But what I do know is that what we're doing with all of the technology that we have, I think we are coming up with a lot of great ideas. We're coming up with a lot of great innovations. And, in those articles, there's some excellent things that are happening. But the bottom line is learning occurring. And that's the number one thing that I care about. Our students learning when we instill some of these things. So if we decide to use some of these algorithms in this more advanced way, are we going to implement it in a way where the student or whoever is the learner is actually learning? That is the key.
And Daryl, if I can jump in.
Please do.
The sort of underlying assumption that you made in your question to Marcus was that a human could actually understand a story better than an algorithm. So there's a company in the Chicago area just started called Narrative Science that uses algorithms to write news stories. And if you look at these news stories, they've been starting with sports. So, high school sports, doesn't make sense to send reporters from some high school game. It will actually collect the data that come out of that game at the end, that play-by-play announcement, and create a story so that now these stories are individualized and these stories have emotion. They have a narrative structure. They have a dramatic arc. And I can remember being in college and taking a really crappy English story because the professor didn't care at all. It was a terrible class. It was just awful. I'd actually rather have this algorithm that uses the expert knowledge from the best people in the world to help me design a better story and learn how to read narrative and write narrative and relate that to other people. Sometimes I'm having a person who's just not that motivated. So that's not to say there isn't a place for human beings, but I don't want to say that we can't, algorithms essentially take the best practice, take the best knowledge we have and try to build that into structure. So rather than having this cranky old guy who taught me English 1 who was just unhappy and depressed and made everybody unhappy in class, I'd rather have the algorithm do it.
Now, the thing I'm to touch on the point I made before, the algorithm you just explained, the way you framed it sounds great, but again, it comes down to if that is implemented, will learners learn? Will the most learners learn that we can possibly teach? Will the most learners learn if we start using algorithms? And my concern is that we're so focused on using the technology, the algorithms, we're so focused on that, but we're not spending enough time really digging into what it takes to learn and what it takes, going back to the question a few minutes ago, to keep the learners motivated to learn.
Well, I think that everyone here is highlighting very important points, and Dr. Zach, you also make a really good point too, in that people are, we are fallible, right? And teachers are not perfect. And often having a bad teacher can also have very detrimental effects on a student and their development. And especially, if it's tailored to a certain area. If you have a bad math teacher, then maybe you'll be struggling or be behind, for the rest of your schooling if you had a bad start in math. But Joanne, I'm curious how you funnel all of these different elements into creating online courses, because this is obviously something that we're seeing, a huge rise in dramatically out there. There's a lot of people taking online courses, whether it be to get a bachelor degree or a master's degree. And how do you take all these things into account?
Well, we certainly aren't doing everything automated at this point. We do have a course management system. We use Moodle, and we have a small enough program and dedicated enough faculty that we are still grading our own discussion questions. And actually, if our online courses get too big, we will actually get TAs, teaching assistants who can help us. But yeah, we haven't really gotten to the point. I think I would resist. I'm not a Luddite by any stretch of the imagination, but I think I would resist letting someone else grade the essays that these students had worked so hard on. Because I want to see the learning. I don't want a computer just telling me, oh, they've gotten this far, or whatever, in highlighting these concepts or things like that. So I find myself a bit resistant to technology that's doing a lot of the grading. Now, when it comes to, fill in the blank or multiple choice, that's great because, I've taught very large classes and I was, really dedicated to having short answers and essays. And then about halfway through the semester, I had to switch over to half standardized and automated so I could just remain sane. So there's a reason for that. And, there were some students who would do so much better once I switched to more standardized, they would just really be very good at that. So their learning style matched with that, their testing style, that they succeed to match with that versus the essay. So I think there's room for a lot of different assessment styles, and even as far as evaluating essays and writing. Perhaps that could serve some students well. I guess ultimately people are different. Everybody's different. They'll respond to it.
Go ahead, Devin.
I think this depends hugely also on the discipline that we're talking about. I mean, if there's, an English essay, taking apart a couple of Shakespeare's sonnets, it could be evaluated by a machine for, reading level, but it has to be evaluated by a TA for quality. But then, what if you're writing code, or what if you're taking photographs? It really depends on what exactly you're trying to learn. If you're trying to learn, how to make a pot out of clay, or, some other thing, like humanities and some other social sciences and stuff are not nearly as susceptible to, basically an algorithmic checking utility or something like that, than, mathematics or coding or anything like that. It really depends a lot on the material and what the product is. If the product is writing, if the product is numbers, if the product is something that can be checked through a machine, the definitions are changing constantly. So it's pretty hard to make predictions right now, but we can try anyway.
That's very true. I mean, it totally depends on what it is that you are studying and what the field is in the area of expertise. But then overall, you can't deny that there is still kind of a stigma around online education, online courses, or students that might get a degree from something like the University of Phoenix. When it comes to employers that then are looking at your resume and want to see what your education history is, they will have negative connotations associated with that. And so, how do you think that we all should, or how do you all think that we can change that and approach it in a different way so that that you can, open people's eyes, open employers' eyes, and say that in some cases this might be the right path forward, in others maybe it should be highly questionable? Well,
it's a lot of the stuff is changing, not just in what the employers are looking at, but what people who are applying for jobs and positions are actually bringing to the table. And it's becoming a lot less like, oh, I got my degree here, and this was my mentor, and here's my recommendation. And it's more like, here's this thing I built in my free time. Here is this, this literature I submitted to a journal. Here is an experiment I did on my own, and here's a website I built. And you can show that stuff. It's like we're moving away from a CV and towards a sort of portfolio environment for jobs and stuff, where you're telling people what you've built, because people are building so many things. You're not just being evaluated on your academic accomplishments.
And also, I think a lot of the action is between disciplines now. So many more students are really transdisciplinary, and our teaching is really including different disciplines. So I just sat on a dissertation committee for a guy who got a PhD in English who spent time in my neuroscience lab, and he applied neuroscience to understand narrative structure. And it was fascinating for him, fascinating for me. I learned a lot, he learned a lot, and that's a kind of combination of disciplines. So I think these automated techniques allow, again, to pull from sort of the best practice across disciplines, but also algorithms don't tire, right? So I may still want to be in a traditional class where I have a sort of master instructor who can tell me, kind of guide me through this as I learn whatever this skill I'm trying to learn, which could be critical thinking, could be writing, could be coding. But it would be nice to have this algorithm background that says, hey, if you want some additional help at 3 a.m, you can pop in your algorithm and it's going to give you feedback. And so I think, Daryl, it's not either or, it's and, right? I'd like to have the instructor do this and have some other algorithms that, again, many of these already exist that can be used to enhance the learning environment as people self-learn. I think that was Devin's point in the beginning was, all this learning is essentially teaching yourself how to do things. And so the instructor is just a guide on how you teach yourself. And so if the instructor is the guide, why not use every other possible guide in the world?
Mm-hmm. So one thing I think you're starting to get. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Allison. Well, Allison first, and then Joanne, then Marcus.
Sorry about that. I was going to say one thing I think you're really starting to get at there is this idea of building out the ecosystem around online learning. So it shouldn't just be about online lectures. If it's going to be an online course, it needs to have the full course experience. So the lecture is one key part of that, but it's also about developing the ability for students to interact with their students, making sure that students are getting doing the outside work appropriately and getting evaluated appropriately, and sort of bringing that full classroom and learning experience to online lectures and online education. I think we're really starting to move in that direction. You're seeing, platforms like Coursera and Udacity. They're in the early days, and there's still a lot for them to figure out. But you can see them starting to look at how they can involve their students. You see them doing meetups and things like that, and really looking in that direction in terms of how can we take the lecture experience and make it the ongoing university experience.
Who was going to go add something to that next?
I think I was going to go.
Marcus, yeah, I remember you wanted to speak up. Go ahead, please.
All right. So, some great points being made here, and Allison, just to touch on what you said about the full classroom experience, I think something about online learning that I'm a big believer of is that online world is so different from the physical world that we really have to take that into a heavy consideration, that we look at the possibilities of the online world as its own entity. And some of the things that happen in the physical classroom, we can transfer into the virtual world in some way, but there are possibilities and just innovations and all sorts of things we can do in the virtual worlds, and that already happen, that we really need to pay attention to. And if we can pay attention to those things and really build on those things, that will create a full classroom experience that can either equal or maybe even surpass the physical environment.
Would you mind sharing some of examples of what you're saying? Because you're just saying things. We could bring these things. So what, if you could just give a few examples, that'd be great.
Oh, a challenge. I like a challenge there.
Let's hear them.
So one of the things that I research is how in virtual worlds, video games, and participatory media, there is all sorts of learning that's taking place. And so right now, video games, and before I took this class on video games, I never thought learning took place inside of a video game. And play Mario, jump on the mushroom, everything's good. But after this class, it just absolutely opened up the world to me to realize how much learning is taking place, because that video game is a virtual world. So between to give an example, reinforcement, for example, you do something that is not good, your character dies. That teaches you, I can't do that thing, so let me go ahead and do something else. There's also, around that video game, there are the affinity spaces. So you got people who are playing this game, and then they go into these affinity spaces, and they are now sharing ideas and teaching each other how to do even better in the game. So that's just one example of the type of way to look at a virtual world and say, okay, if we do these types of things, if we look at how learning is taking place here, we can transfer that to, if we have an online class, is there a way we can transfer it to an online class?
Right. I really like your example, and thank you for sharing that. And I think actually we are building a generation of people who will be very comfortable online, and they'll be comfortable with algorithms, and they'll be, comfortable with this sort of automatic feedback. Because like you said, with gaming, they're getting it all the time. I have 4 kids. They've all managed to game at some point to different levels, and they're learning. I want to make sure they're reading physical books and things like that, but they are engaging with that virtual world. And I think that's why online education will succeed especially as people are moving through. Oddly enough, though, we do find that freshmen who come into online, course management systems have to sort of make their way around. But yeah, wouldn't it be great if there were games and some more engaging ways to get to them, instead of, type your response in this box and then 2 people respond to you and you respond to 2 people, something more creative and engaging. That'd be wonderful.
All right, I have to wrap it up there, unfortunately, but I think that we've hit upon some really interesting points today too, which is that, education, the way that we approach it, is not something that is so black and white, and you can't just stay stuck in the past and say that, if we're missing this one element, that means that we're completely flipping education on its head. It's about enhancing the experience and trying to use it all. And so maybe enhancing the classroom experience, but having algorithms that can also interact with you at any date, at any time that you want in the middle of the night. Dr. Zach, as you pointed out, I'd like to think it's a whole brave, new, exciting world out there in the world of education, but I'm sure there will be some mess ups along the way. But I want to thank you all so much for giving your input. Allison, Devin, Joanne, Marcus, and Dr. Zach. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
All right, guys, stick around. More coming up on HuffPost Live.